Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I just watched the second episode of season 4 of Star Trek Discovery, and I think it was a terrible episode in almost every way. There were a few moments which I did enjoy because they were kind of funny to me, most of them unintentional comedy. Because of how stupid it was, it kind of made me laugh. There were a few moments that genuinely made me laugh out loud because of how ridiculous it was, and some of the dialogue, some of the technobabble in this episode was the worst one I heard in a long, long while, and they were always explaining things in excessive scientific terms. Like one moment, the admiral asks Stamets, "Why was Book's planet destroyed by the anomaly, but that space station wasn't?" And then Stamets starts saying, "Oh, it's relative distance." He phrases everything in excessive scientific terms just to say it was because it was closer. Instead of just saying the planet was closer to the anomaly than the station was, that's why, but no, that's not how he phrased it. He says, "Oh, it's relative distance, it's this," and then he gives an equation or something. And so it was ridiculous. And the same later in the episode when Mr. No Response suggests the idea of surfing the gravitational waves to safety, which is totally ridiculous by the way, but the way he phrases it, he says it's basic Newtonian laws, it's fluidics and thermodynamics and whatever. And said the way he phrased it, just to say they should try to surf it, was absolutely ridiculous. He says that he used to surf some giant waves on some planet, and so he suggests surfing on the waves, and also none of this makes any sense. This whole anomaly, they say their theory is that it's binary black holes. And yet, since when are black holes moving faster than light? Because throughout the episode, they're talking about how this anomaly is moving from solar system to solar system and destroying everything, and they must warn people immediately to evacuate immediately, as if it's going to hit them the next day. And none of this makes any sense. If they think it's just black holes, how come no one questions since when do black holes fly faster than light? It's moving from system to system in days. They even show an animation of the gravity wave pushing the moon of Book's planet into the planet, and that's how it was destroyed. They didn't say it was anti-gravity, they said it was normal gravity. So since when is gravity pushing things? So it's absolutely ridiculous. The whole technobabble aspect of this episode is some of the worst I ever heard, and it was unintentional comedy because how they use excessive science sounding phrases to explain simple things. And how come no one mentions the possibility that maybe it might affect the spore drive, like they use the spore drive to jump anywhere they want without any kind of a test first, like maybe not jump right into it right away, maybe do some tests from a bigger distance first and do it gradually. No, they just jump almost into the middle of the anomaly right away. And then there's the lack of continuity from the previous episode, because remember how in the previous episode they were trying to stop that space station from rotating too quickly, and somehow they forgot about the tractor beam. The tractor beam doesn't exist anymore, and yet in this episode they establish a new kind of tractor beam, which is kind of a tether made from the programmable matter, which is supposed to be able to hold the ships at a big distance. So why the hell didn't they use it in the previous episode when they needed to slow down that space station or to rescue people from it and so on? So they also forgot about the transporters in that episode, but they could have easily, the old Star Trek shows, whenever they wanted to have some tension, they simply said, "Oh, the transporters don't work in this environment," or "the tractor beam doesn't work for some reason." So I would be fine with that if there was a quick mention of why they cannot use it. So, but there was none. And in this episode, suddenly they have this magical tether, which apparently is able to go into infinite distance somehow and hold ships at great distance. So why didn't they use it in the very previous episode? And of course it snaps anyway, so it was totally pointless. There are often all kinds of scenes in this show that are just meant to be visually entertaining, I guess, but serve absolutely no purpose in the story. So they have this new ability to connect the ship with this tether, but then it snaps right away. And so what was even the point to introduce it if it's useless? So this is absolutely pointless and ridiculous, and it's just, it even had that snap sound of a normal cable snapping and so, and this is all in space, of course. And there was one joke which was intentional, which I actually enjoyed, when Stamets was accidentally being awkward with Book, when, they were trying to get into the anomaly, and there were all the debris and all of that, and then Book says, "Oh, so much dust," and then Stamets says, "Well, it did just pass through a solar system." And then Books looks at him, "Yeah, that's the remains of my planet." So that was kind of funny. And then Book starts seeing the birds from the previous episode, the same ones he saw when he escaped his planet. So that also almost made me laugh, but of course it was just in his head. Thank God they had the sense not to make it the actual birds from his planet, which he's now seeing in space. That would have been, again, one of the silliest things, but Apparently it's just in his mind. At least I hope that was the intention. Otherwise, this is again one of the most ridiculous things we've ever seen. And the way it was edited, especially in the beginning of the episode when he sees those visions, he tries to think back about what happened. It was all done visually in an annoying way. And the whole thing of him being depressed and in shock and he doesn't speak for the half of the episode, all this forced emotional drama is not done that well in my opinion. It's just boring to me and sometimes unintentional comedy, like when Michael said that she's trying to get Book to cry. That was kind of funny because how much Michael herself loves crying, but she's now trying to actively get other people to also start crying all the time. And there was a quick scene between her and Stamets, and apparently he forgave her completely about what she did to him in the previous season when she threw him out of an airlock so that the bad guys will not be able to capture him and won't be able to use the spore drive. So she threw him out into space in the previous season, and when the season ended, he was still looking at her as if he hates her now, and yet now he's making jokes about it, so apparently he forgave all about it. So what a waste of a setup, which could have been interesting, of some kind of tension between characters. It could have been interesting, but no, he just forgave her and he loves her now and everything is okay. We have this scene of a meeting of all the leaders of the Federation, and there's a Ferengi officer there who doesn't say a single word and is just there to be there. So it's supposed to be a cameo of a species which we recognize, and yet he looks so different from the one we recognize. So what's the point? Unless their intention is trying to piss off the old fans by showing, oh, we did it again, we once again redesigned an established species to annoy you. And there were a few other Ferengi that we saw in the previous episode in the background, and they all look like the new design. So it's not just this specific Ferengi who might have been, some kind of hybrid of different species. No, all the Ferengi look like that now, apparently. And he doesn't even say a single word, so what's the point? So why waste so much hours of makeup on that guy just so that he will stand and be on the screen for 2 seconds? And that's it, so what's the point? And the most ridiculous part of the episode was probably that scene with Adira and Grey, and the ship's doctor apparently built an android body for Grey, and he even mentioned Dr. Sung by name and said that this process was attempted 800 years ago on a Starfleet admiral called Picard. So he's mentioning what happened in season 1 of Picard when Picard turned into an android. His consciousness was moved into an android body when he died. And this was 800 years before this time frame, and the Doctor is easily able to conjure up an android body, which obviously begs the question, why aren't everybody doing that now? So they basically solved death. Basically anyone on their deathbed can now transfer their consciousness into an android body, but then they have the excuse to explain that by saying the success rate was so low that people stopped using that. Which is again ridiculous, because first of all, this was 800 years before this time frame. So how come no one managed to improve the success rate? And also, why would it be a problem on someone's deathbed? Like, why not take that chance if you're about to die anyway? And if you look back at that scene of Picard dying in the end of season 1 of Picard, then we see him dying, like he dies and everybody crying about him, and then they transfer his mind into the android. So why don't everybody doing that? Like, you don't have to do it while you're alive, apparently. So why not be on the ready, and why not attempt the risk? Like, what have you got to lose? If you're going to die anyway, why not take the chance? Even if it's a low success rate. So shouldn't there be like millions of people alive now who are all having synthetic bodies, because apparently it's so easy to create them now? So how come they say no one is using it again? And also they say that the new body will grow and die normally, but why should it? Like Picard himself wanted that, so that kind of made sense in the Picard show, because Picard always talked about how mortality is what defines humanity and so on, which I'm not sure I agree with, by the way. But that's what he believed in, so it makes sense that they made it for him. They made a body for him which will be the same age and will die a normal death by aging, because that's what he wanted. But how come now they're saying that's kind of the default? Like, that's how it should be done always. Like, you have a new android body which will age and die. But why wouldn't you simply get another body after that? So it makes no sense. And then when he mentions the risk, and then Adira asks, so wait a minute, so if the success rate is so low as you say, should we be worried that maybe Grey will be lost in this process? But then he says, no, she will be fine, because she transferred her mind already to someone. So that means, if it worked once, then it for sure will work again. So it's no big deal. So he just tells them about the risks, and then the next second says, oh no, there is no risk for her specifically, for him, sorry. And by the way, for the people calling me a bigot and so on because I keep confusing the genders and all, can you really blame me? Seriously, can you really blame me when the show itself keeps changing it? Like Adira was first introduced as a her, as a she, suddenly it's they, and their boyfriend is obviously not a normal male, you can say. Okay, so can you please forgive me for being mixed up? I don't intend to offend anyone or be offensive. I'm literally confused. Like the use of language with the plural and all of that is really confusing for me, especially because in my language there are genders even in plural. So for me it makes absolutely no sense to do this kind of separation, and the fact that they're kind of mixing it around and changing it. And I think in this scene Gray even mentions that he was transitioned before, like, and it's confusing with the whole trill thing. So I'm kind of confused. What did he mean? Does he talk about transferring to a new host body as a trill, or does he talk about changing genders, or does he now talk about changing into an android? So I'm literally confused. So when I'm being confused with all of this, it's not because I'm trying to be offensive. It's because I'm actually am confused, okay? And I record these reviews on the fly, by the way. I don't write a script, and so when I get confused and I accidentally mix up the genders and all of that, so it's not intentional. And can you really blame me when the show makes it extra confusing? Like, they made Adira a trill and all of that. And by the way, for anyone who thinks I hate these characters because of what they are, look back at my reviews of that first time they appeared together in the previous season. That was actually my favorite episode, maybe of the whole show. Despite of these strange things, I was okay with that because the way they did it was actually well done in my opinion. It was actually emotional, probably my favorite episode of the whole show. Then I was totally fine with this whole relationship and this new character. And Adira, I thought, has such a massive potential to be an interesting character, even maybe become the lead of the show if they had done it right. And she could have even been a Mary Sue kind of character in a way that will make sense, because she has the memories of multiple previous lives, so it will make sense that she knows how to do everything because she has so much experience, even though she looks like a little girl and so on. So that would actually be the perfect setup for a Mary Sue kind of character. So even if they had gone that route, I would have been fine with that because it actually is explained in the story. But then they totally wasted and squandered that opportunity to make her into an interesting character that will grow and evolve, and instead they de-evolved her into just a bumbling, shy kid who doesn't know what to say, what to do. And so now it makes no sense because they do have the memories of all the previous lives, and yet they don't act like it. And Gray isn't supposed to be part of the same person because it's all part of the same symbiote, and yet somehow it became its own creature which now wants to have an android body of itself. And there's another big problem in the scene, which again, I'm not trying to be offensive toward the actors, but when you play a character which is currently supposed to be some kind of invisible imaginary friend which only one person can see and all of that, you don't have a physical body, and yet you have acne on your face, you have some skin condition which you didn't have previously, so it's not a memory, it's not how that person looked previously and that's how Adira remembers them, but no, that's a new development. So suddenly the actor developed all this skin condition and they tried to cover it with makeup and you can still see it. It's on a character which is supposed to be from someone's memory, and they build an android body for the character which also have the same skin condition even though it's a synthetic body. And then later in the same scene they complain about a mole on the hand and they want to remove the mole, and yet they don't try to remove the skin condition from the face. That's not a problem, that's something that no one apparently notices. It makes all of this absolutely ridiculous. So they have a big problem with the mole on the hand and have an argument if they should remove it, but no one mentions the face problem. And why didn't they simply CGI it out, like at least on the android body, which is a hologram of the android body? So why not erase that so it would be less ridiculous? And so again, I'm not trying to be mean toward the actors, but seriously, when you play a role of a synthetic body, in this case of a robot, how can you have a skin condition at the same time? Like, can you imagine if Brent Spiner showed up to work one day with pimples and they couldn't cover it with enough makeup, it was still visible, so they just allowed him to continue and everyone would pretend it's not there and it would be there on the screen for decades to come, even though he's supposed to be an android and it makes no sense. So how ridiculous would that be? So that's how ridiculous this scene is. And with today's technology and the amount of money they're pouring from all these special effects in the rest of the episode, couldn't they spend a little bit of that budget to CGI the face to make it more normal? And they had in the scene itself, they had the similar thing that they discussed, so why not simply combine the two? So this is the kind of thing that really annoys me. And speaking of the special effects, even some of that is kind of ridiculous. Like on the bridge, they constantly have those flamethrowers shooting fire into the bridge, even when there is no action, when the ship is not shaking. Like, when there were explosions and all of that, you might not notice that it's kind of artificial flamethrowers on the bridge and all of that. But they had a scene which was relatively steady, and people just standing on the bridge talking, and yet constantly you see these flamethrowers shooting fire into the bridge all the time from all directions in an obviously artificial way, so it was very noticeable. And there was also that scene when they lose gravity and they fly into the middle of the bridge and they don't continue flying. So that was also scientifically stupid, because if they have the inertia to fly upward, why do they suddenly stop in the middle of the bridge and then they cannot reach anything? And how ridiculous it is that they still don't have seat belts, even though they have programmable matter and infinite tethers that can hold ships in great distances, and yet inside the bridge they don't have any kind of mechanism to protect them from this situation, to tie them to the station so that they won't fly off and then unable to reach the station, as happens at least twice in this episode. So that was again unintentional comedy, and especially funny because later in the same episode, just a little bit later, apparently they do have force fields which can go around the person's station, which Michael uses to have a private conversation with Book. When Book flies off into the anomaly to study it, and he's kind of depressed and maybe thinks about dying or something, and then Michael has to pep talk him out of it, and then she wants to have a private conversation with him, and she asks for a private channel, and then a force field appears around her and her chair, so that she can have a private conversation with Book without the rest of the bridge crew hearing it. So that part literally made me laugh, especially because earlier in the same episode they were floating out of their seats and unable to go back to their stations without gravity, and the same mechanism couldn't have been used to prevent that, or to protect them from all the flamethrowers which they installed on the bridge for some reason. So no, they only use the force field to have private conversations so that the bridge crew will not overhear them. So that part literally made me laugh, maybe hardest than I ever laughed from the show. Much funnier than all the intentional jokes. I also saw in someone's comment that it reminds them of the Cone of Silence, which was in some old movie, which was a deliberate comedy in which people could have a private conversation without anyone hearing them. But here, I think it was done totally seriously. I don't think it was an intentional comedy. It was in the middle of a dramatic scene of Book who is being depressed because his whole planet blew up and he wants to commit suicide in the anomaly, and Michael has to convince him otherwise, and that's the moment when they choose to have such a ridiculous new plot device, which literally made me laugh out loud. And especially when just a few minutes earlier they were flying in the middle of the bridge and no one thought about using the same force field or a programmable matter or just a seatbelt. No, they're still floating around on the bridge and somehow stopping in the middle of the bridge and then falling down. So much ridiculous stuff in this episode. And also a lot of it I think was kind of inspired by the Interstellar movie, which I noticed even in previous seasons of the show. There were a lot of visual special effects which kind of reminded me of Interstellar, so it's like the makers of the show are fans of that movie and keep trying to copy it at every opportunity. And someone even mentions that in the previous episode, and I kind of dismissed it because it was similar but not similar enough that I would call it a ripoff. But now seeing this episode, which again had similar stuff, now I'm starting to see, oh, someone watched Interstellar and tries to copy it. So there are all these shots of the ship which are shot as if the camera is installed on the ship itself. So when the ship spins for the sport jump, we're now seeing it from its own point of view, which I actually like, by the way. There are some visual stuff in the show that I do like because it is expensive and it is pretty. So there are all kinds of moments which are actually good, but then there are all those things which they obviously copy from other movies, and in this case Interstellar. In the previous episode there was the part when they were trying to get to that station which was spinning too fast, and so they also spin the ship in the same way to match, and yet it was done in a ridiculous way. They said it's in orbit of the station, it spins around the station, even though the station is flying at an insane speed at a certain direction. So how can you both fly in the same direction and spin around it at the same time? So it wasn't done in the same way as in that scene in Interstellar when they were trying to dock with the spinning station. They simply spinned their ship to match, but not in an orbit of the station. So the way they did it in Discovery looked and sounded much more ridiculous in my opinion. And the whole thing with this new anomaly, which they think is a black hole but is actually something else, and it's kind of having this lensing effect on space. That's also similar to what was shown in Interstellar when they had those anomalies which can also twist space and all of that. And they had that black hole and all of that. And there was that scene when the main hero had to fly into the black hole to get the data to save humanity. And they have a scene here when Book has to fly into this anomaly and risk his life because he also needs the data to send back to them so that they can save other planets. And so there are all these similar elements which I don't think are a coincidence. In the previous episode I thought it might be just a coincidence or that it's not close enough to really call it a ripoff or anything, but now I see more and more clues that they're kind of borrowing the same ideas, the same visual style as was in Interstellar. So I'm now curious to see where they go with it. How much more will they borrow from that movie? I guess it will turn out that this new anomaly was made by some fifth dimensional beings. Maybe some time traveling will be involved, and it's kind of hilarious how this show never addressed that short trek in which the ship was once again in the past. And they said it was alone for 1,000 years, and that's the time frame in which the computer developed into a sentient entity, and yet it didn't yet happen in the timeline of the show, and yet the computer is already a sentient entity and already called Zora, like in that short trek, and yet the ship now looks totally different. The 1,000 years haven't passed without the crew on board, so I'm guessing they will do it later on, maybe in the end of this season. Maybe they will have to go back into the past to fix something. Maybe they will refit the ship to remove all the advanced technology so that if it's found in the past it will not affect the timeline, and only Zora the computer will stay on the ship and they will all go into cryo freezing or something to get back into the same future later by hiding the ship in the nebula. So I guess they might explain it later on, but it's ridiculous that we have to wait years and multiple seasons to see how they tie it all together if they didn't forget about it. Apparently they don't forget about it because they are having all these little clues toward it, like the ship's computer now being called Zora and all these other connections. So apparently they didn't forget about it, so how will they tie it all together? So I guess the only solution is time traveling. So anyway, Book takes his ship into the anomaly, and it's funny how his ship can do literally anything. Like, how come no one else having the same kind of ship? He has the most overpowered ship in the whole galaxy. No one else has the same kind of ships. Wouldn't it be very useful to have lots of ships like that, which can go into these anomalies and black holes and to shapeshift, which somehow, they actually say that shapeshifting somehow protects it from the gravity waves or something, and he can surf the waves out of the anomaly somehow by using Newtonian fluidic rules, which was mentioned by Bryce because he knows that because he used to surf giant waves on some planet, which maybe was also inspired by Interstellar, maybe now I think about it. So Newtonian laws allow him to surf gravitational waves out of the anomaly, and he had to go into the anomaly to get the data which they need, just like in the movie Interstellar. But then after he lives with it, suddenly they say, oh, actually the data was useless because the anomaly keeps changing directions, so we didn't learn anything from it, so it was totally useless. And I guess they will reveal there is some kind of intelligence behind it, some kind of fifth dimensional beings, or people from the future, or whatever. Someone is doing this deliberately, I guess. And Gray will become an android and will become its own character, which is a terrible thought in my opinion. These two characters, again, had the potential to be something interesting with the whole Trill thing, but apparently they forgot their Trill. They forget that they're both supposed to be Trill with multiple personalities, so shouldn't it be like a character with a multiple personality disorder, which might be an interesting character, or a character which will grow to be awesome, kind of like Jadzia Dax, who knew how to do lots of things in a way that made sense in the context of the show because she has the experience of multiple lives, and yet Adira is still behaving like a little kid. So does she have the memories of all the previous hosts, or doesn't she? Sorry him, sorry they. I'm literally confused by the language with this whole set of characters, and so it's such a mess. This whole show is turning into a bigger mess than it was in the past, and that's unfortunate because I actually thought the show is improving over time, that it's gradually becoming slightly more tolerable because, you know, by jumping into the future, suddenly the continuity mistakes are not as bad, and suddenly the advanced technology makes a little bit more sense, and yet suddenly technology became less advanced now, so suddenly they don't have tractor beams, suddenly they no longer have the mobile transporters which they kept using in the previous season. Suddenly a lot of technology seemed to disappear. Somehow Book's ship is more advanced than all of Starfleet combined. Only his ship is able to do anything. And why does he always take the cat into danger? Like, he plans to commit suicide in the anomaly, he goes on a suicide mission, and yet he loves the cat so much, so why not leave the cat on the Discovery? No, he takes the cat with him on the ship. because it needs to be on screen to look cute. And so these kind of things, these kind of illogical behavior, illogical decisions, illogical dialogue, and the whole script makes no sense. All of it is ridiculous, and some of it is unintentional comedy, which ironically makes it a little bit more entertaining to watch, because if it was just boring, it would have been even worse. At least all the silly, stupid stuff is kind of unintentional entertainment. So that's all I had to say about it for today. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.